Today is Friday, September 1st, 2023, and this is the Dunkley Report. Former President Donald Trump has pleaded not guilty and sought to sever his case from other defendants accused along with him of illegally trying to overturn the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. Trump's decision Thursday to waive arraignment means he won't have to show up for the hearing at Fulton County Superior Court judge set for September 6th, averting the dramatic arraignments that accompanied Trump's other criminal cases. Trump's attorney also sought to separate his case from others who are seeking a speedy trial. The attorney says giving the Republican former president less than 2 months to prepare a defense against a 98-page indictment would violate his constitutional rights. Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas is acknowledging that he took 3 trips last year aboard a private plane owned by Republican megadonor Harlan Crow. It's the first time in years that Thomas has reported receiving hospitality from Crow. In a report made public Thursday, the 75-year-old justice said he was complying with new guidelines from the federal judiciary for reporting travel. But the filing doesn't include any earlier travel at Crow's expense, including a 2019 trip in Indonesia aboard the yacht owned by Crow, a wealthy businessman and benefactor of conservative causes. Thomas's report comes amid a heightened focus on ethics at the High Court. 2 former leaders of the far-right Proud Boys extremist group have been sentenced to more than a decade each in prison for spearheading an attack on the U.S. Capitol to try to prevent the peaceful transfer of power from Donald Trump to Joe Biden after the 2020 presidential election. The 17-year prison term for organizer Joseph Biggs and 15-year sentence for leader Zachary Rell are some of the longest sentences handed down yet in the January 6, 2021 attack. They were the first Proud Boys to be sentenced by U.S. District Judge Timothy Kelly, who will separately preside over similar hearings for 3 other Proud Boys. Florida and Georgia residents living along Hurricane Idalia's path of destruction are picking through piles of rubble where homes once stood, throwing tarps over roofs, and gingerly navigating through mazes of streets left underwater or clogged with fallen trees. Rescue and repair efforts were in full force in Florida's remote Big Bend area, where Idalia roared ashore with 125-mile-per-hour winds. Wednesday, shredding homes, ripping off roofs, snapping tall trees, and turning streets into rivers. Florida Governor Ron DeSantis toured the area with federal emergency officials on Thursday, and President Joe Biden planned to visit Florida on Saturday. Authorities say at least 74 people have died in Johannesburg when a nighttime fire ripped through a 5-story building that had been used by homeless people and squatters. An emergency services spokesperson said more than 50 others were injured in the blaze that broke out at about 1 a.m. on Thursday. A local official says some of the people living in the building in South Africa's biggest city threw themselves out of windows to escape the flames and might have died then. There were 12 children among the dead, the youngest a 1-year-old. The emergency services spokesperson says the death toll could increase. Witnesses say as many as 200 people or more may have been living in the building. Authorities say at least 74 people have died in Johannesburg when a nighttime fire ripped through a 5-story building that had been used by homeless people and squatters. An emergency services spokesperson said more than 50 others were injured in the blaze that broke out at about 1 a.m. on Thursday. A local official says some of the people living in the building in South Africa's biggest city threw themselves out of windows to escape the flames and might have died then. There were 12 children among the dead, the youngest a 1-year-old. The emergency services spokesperson says the death toll could increase. Witnesses say as many as 200 people or more may have been living in the building. The Texas Supreme Court will allow the new state law banning gender-affirming care for minors to take effect on Friday, setting up Texas to be the most populous state with such restrictions on transgender children. A state district judge last week ruled the pending law violated the rights of transgender children and their families to seek appropriate medical care. The judge issued a temporary injunction to block the law. State officials immediately appealed to the state's highest court for civil cases. The Supreme Court order allowing the law to take effect did not explain the decision. The order did not address whether the law is unconstitutional, and a full hearing is expected. An inflation gauge closely tracked by the Federal Reserve remained low last month, adding to signs of cooling price increases and raising the likelihood that the Fed will leave interest rates unchanged when it next meets in late September. Prices rose just 0.2% from June to July, the third straight modest increase. Compared with a year earlier, prices rose 3.3% in July, up from a 3% annual increase in June. The year-over-year figure, though, is down sharply from the 7% peak it reached a year ago, though still above the Fed's 2% inflation target. It rose partly because of much smaller price increases a year ago. Faith has a deep-rooted presence at the Minnesota State Fair. From the decades-old Lutheran and Methodist dining halls to an evangelical chapel handing out thousands of free Bibles, to a booth seeking to combat misinformation about Islam. For many faith communities, the fair has long been an opportunity to fundraise and, more importantly, to showcase faith-rooted hospitality and reach out to a diverse crowd that can top 2 million. For those late summer fairgoers, faith initiatives offer chances to attend worship without leaving the fairgrounds, having sit-down ham loaf sandwiches and Swedish egg coffee at the crack of dawn, and experience a disappearing slice of unpolarized Americana, one pastor-served dill pickle popsicle at a time. The biggest storyline in the first NFL season this century, without Tom Brady, centers on Aaron Rodgers' quest to turn the New York Jets into a championship contender. The 39-year-old, four-time NFL MVP left Green Bay for a team that hasn't reached the playoffs since the 2010 season and hasn't won a Super Bowl since Broadway. Joe Namath guaranteed one more than 50 years ago. Rodgers has plenty of talent surrounding him, but the Jets play in one of the toughest divisions in the league, and a conference loaded with contenders, including the defending Super Bowl champions. Patrick Mahomes and the Kansas City Chiefs are aiming to become the first team to win consecutive titles since Brady led the New England Patriots to back-to-back rings in 2003 through 2004. Today's news was reported by the Associated Press. This has been the World News for Friday, September 1st, 2023. Thanks again for joining us at The Dunkley Report.